and welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 129. This episode is the first episode of the new 2026 season. I think this might be season 4 of the podcast already. And this is the official first day of free agency. Free agency negotiation window has already kicked off 2 days ago on Monday with all kinds of headlines and things we haven't seen before in terms of trades and trades that we thought went down that didn't go down, involving teams that play the Bengals like the Baltimore Ravens. So there's plenty of news to discuss. Not a ton of action on the Bengals in terms of acquiring new players going into the new season, but the Bengals were never the quickest on the draw in free agency. They did get a couple pieces that were sorely needed on the defensive side, and as is typical this time of year, they probably overpaid. They were the highest bidder, and that's why they're getting these players, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the players who are going to be leaving the Bengals and where they're going to be headed and some of the other big stories that have been going on throughout the NFL. But if you're brand new to this show, don't worry. There's no advertisements. This show isn't sponsored by anything. And typically I like to get really prepared and have all my information, but I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a totally unprepared, fly by the seat of my pants type of episode. I wanted to do it like so professional, have everything buttoned up, but I swear to God, yesterday I turned on the YouTube channel of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which is a newspaper that's been in operation for over 200 years. They're about to go out of business because they've been losing lots of money. So I don't know if their reporting staff just is on they're kind of checked out at this point, but this guy started off the video. I won't name any names, but the guy started off the video. You click play. He takes a potato chip, puts it in his mouth, and eats it, and then stares into the camera, and then starts talking about welcome to the show, and he's got potato chips. I don't know. That was so. If a historic organization like that can have a guy, first second of the show, potato chips into the mouth, then I can do a podcast for you on little to no preparation because, I'm doing this for free. And so that guy, and he was getting sponsored. Imagine being a sponsor of a show where the guy, and welcome to the show, guy. Anyway, I won't harp on that, but the Cincinnati Bengals are just as prone to less than professional behavior. I don't know. This is a hard segue. But Cincinnati Bengals. Trying to get back on track here. Cincinnati Bengals we won't get into this, but they've been trying to get money from the state to get some stadium renovations just because the Cleveland Browns figured a way to swindle the Ohio taxpayers out of their unclaimed funds. So they're going to siphon off a bunch of money from the public and use it to build this new stadium up in Cleveland outside of the downtown area, out in some suburb. A stadium that I'm never going to go to because I don't want to go to Cleveland. I have no interest in going to see a Cleveland Browns football game ever in my life. So I am in agreement that I do not want them to use any money from the state. Why? I would much rather them use that for something better, not even for football stadiums, but something better that would help the overall public instead of the stupid football stadium for a billionaire and these club of billionaires who own these teams. So anyway, the Bengals probably aren't going to get any money for a new stadium anytime soon. The Bengals also, they had that NFL report card from the Players Association come out. It leaked out, but the NFL had some kind of legal injunction against the Players Association because they complained about the fact that the results were made public in previous years. So It wasn't supposed to come out anymore, but it got leaked anyway. And the Bengals came in ranked 28th out of 32 teams overall. Let me see if I can find that leaked report somewhere to get like a more granular breakdown of how the Bengals turned out. Okay, I found this. It's on ESPN. You can probably get it a number of other places. But for the Cincinnati Bengals, so they give a lot of different categories. It's like 15, almost, 15 or so, maybe even 20 different categories of things to grade the team on. Treatment of families, F- by the Bengals. Not good. That's about as bad as you can do. And we've heard they don't give any details or explanation or expand upon why the grades are what they are. As they have in past years, they gave us a little bit more background and say, like, players reported no family area at the stadium on game day, no area for children and the mothers, the wives and children and all kind of stuff. So that's continued to be an area of concern for the Bengals. Home game field is a new category that they hadn't graded in the past, and that got a D-. So despite, Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow saying, oh, the turf is fine, we've seen that players don't like playing on turf. They prefer playing on grass. The Bengals continue to be the only team in the AFC North that does not have a natural grass playing field surface. And it's not always perfect, because if we look at the Pittsburgh Steelers real quick here, hopefully I didn't F up the recording. Steelers home game field got an F-, and they had a natural grass field. So one of the worst playing fields in the NFL, according to the players, was natural grass field. So it has to be good quality grass. It can't be. The problem with the Steelers is they have too much going on the grass. They got Pitt University, or University of Pitt, whichever one, Pitt, playing their home games, and also the Steelers. And they also have, I think, some Pennsylvania high school playoff football games, state championship games going on there. So they said that they're going to invest in a new field. But getting back to these, food and dining area, another F- for the Bengals. And this is probably, in past years, it's been just because it hasn't been open and available to the players except on very limited windows. Like if they're not practicing, there's no cafeteria open is what I think. And it's been a lot of pre-packaged, like not good quality food, not fresh, according to previous reports. But nutritionist and dietitian, F. That's most likely just due to the fact that they don't have one on staff available. I know a lot of the players like Joe Burrow and the higher end players have their own nutritionist. So the Bengals may feel like they don't need to get a nutritionist for everybody if they could just have players hire their own nutritionist. But it's something that other teams provide, since nutrition and diet is such a critical part of being a professional athlete. You are what you eat, and it shouldn't be necessarily the responsibility totally on the players, who are coming straight out of college, 22 years old, some, 21 years old. They don't know anything about nutrition and diet at that point yet, and how important it is for their long-term success in the league. So it would be wise of the Bengals to invest in that if they wanted to, have a successful program. But locker room, A-, which is good because they just remodeled it completely. So it's not still A+, but it's at least in the A category. Training room, they also remodeled, A-. Training staff, A-. Weight room, A-. Strength coaches, A. Position coaches, B-. Offensive coordinator, A-. Defensive coordinator, B+. Special teams coordinator, B+. Team travel, C-. Again, you can see kind of where the lower grades are. Like, the players aren't going to usually give bad grades to their own coaches, strength coaches, unless they have some kind of like personal issue with the coach. Head coach, A-. general manager C, team ownership D plus. So all the people who interact directly with the players, like head coach, coordinators, they're all the best friends. General managers C, ownership D plus. So the feeling is clearly not felt from the top in terms of affinity by the Bengals players. And team travel C minus. Again, they probably don't stay. Who knows what the plane and hotel accommodations are like. They definitely don't get anywhere early. They always arrive at the, as late as possible. You never see the Bengals arriving like multiple days ahead of a game. They're always like the day before the game, and then they're getting ready to play. So 28 out of 32 teams, I can't remember. I think they got like somewhere near the bottom, 29th or 30th last year. So improving in a few areas, getting worse in a few other areas. And something that, if we look at now, the Cleveland Browns overall got 30th. A lot of negative grades, especially on the coaching staff, which is a little bit surprising. Head coach C minus, offensive coordinator D plus, special teams coordinator D. I mean, general manager C, team ownership C. Browns got an F in locker room. They didn't get any F minuses. They got a D minus in treatment of families. Browns got a B minus in home game field, which is grass. Nutritionist C plus. Training room C. Training staff C plus. Weight room B plus. Strength coaches B plus. So the players, they gave the defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz an A minus, but they did not like their coaches, which was a little bit of a surprise. Who knows what went on there? Maybe because they knew the coach was leaving and they got another coach coming in. Hard to say, but kind of a little bit of a surprise that the Browns ranked lower than the Bengals. The Baltimore Ravens ranked 12th overall. They got pretty much A's and B's all the way across the board. Home game field A. Treatment of families B plus. Their lowest grade on here is B minus. Team ownership A plus. So like the complete opposite of the Bengals there. So Baltimore Ravens 12th overall. Let's look at the Steelers. Where did they finish overall? Pittsburgh finished dead last, 32nd overall. So as bad as the Bengals did, they still somehow came in second highest ranking in the AFC North in these player grades. So the Steelers, 32nd. Treatment of families F. Home game field F minus. Locker room F minus. Team travel F. Team ownership D minus. Head coach Mike Tomlin, who just resigned or retired or whatever, he got an A. But mostly B's and C's. Mike Tomlin and special teams coordinator, that guy who's chomping that gum, the special teams coordinator for the Steelers, he got an A minus, but everybody else got like B's and C's, a few F's in there, and D minus for the team ownership. So Steelers 32nd, Browns 30th, Bengals 28th, Ravens 12th. So the Ravens far and away the best in the division. Bengals coming in second at 28th. Interesting. And the reason I bring this up is because players are going to factor some of that into their decision about where to decide to make their new home going into the 2026 season. A lot of players are going to be out in the open market. Bengals are looking to improve. That's what they say, apparently. Although, full disclosure, I have not listened to a single interview or press conference or anything where a Bengals coach or personnel member has been speaking with reporters since the Duke Tobin press conference a week after the Bengals season ended, in which he said absolutely nothing, took responsibility for none of the failures of the team, wanted to take credit for things and say that they were just a few plays away to being that championship caliber team that they thought they were, and nothing needed to change. They had all the right players, all the right coaches, all the right personnel in place to win Super Bowls and yada, yada, yada. So no changes were going to be taking place. So since that point, I have not listened to a single word they said because, as Marvin Lewis and Zach Taylor have said in the past, I see better than they hear. So I don't necessarily need to hear anything more from them. I'm totally sick of it, because if you look at these interviews that pop up in my YouTube subscription feed of interviews with Zach Taylor at the Combine or whatever function they've got going on, Duke Tobin giving a press conference somewhere, Dan Pitcher, Al Golden, Darren Simmons, it doesn't matter. Like, these are all the same guys that gave all the same interviews last year, and nothing has changed in the year since then. And it's not like they went in the last year saying, yeah, we're going to get bounced out of the playoffs early. We're going to be playing worthless, meaningless games at the end of the season. We're going to probably go 6-11, be drafting in the top 10 next year. None of those guys said that. Nobody planned on that. So what they were saying was a bunch of unrealistic bullshit. So I don't have time for their bullshit anymore. Let's just see what actions the Bengals take. What do they actually do to improve the team? And what actions don't they take? Number one action that they could have taken, in my opinion, to make this team better was to get Orlando Brown's fat ass off the roster, because he is the most overpaid, and probably overplayed player on this Bengals roster. He's due $16 million. Bengals could have saved $14 million by releasing Orlando Brown, and every other offensive tackle who has been in the range of Orlando Brown's salary and performance has gotten released. But Orlando Brown is going to be 30 years old going into the third year, or sorry, is it third or fourth year? I think it's the fourth year of his contract. I should probably just pull it up and look at it. But who would do such a thing? But Orlando Brown, I know what the Bengals are thinking. They're thinking the same thing that they thought with Bobby Hart back however long it was, when Troy Blackburn said, well, you can't just go to Walmart and pick up a right tackle off the shelf. The Bengals are thinking, oh, you can't just go to Walmart and get Orlando Brown Jr. off the shelf. However, let me get the Orlando Brown, 4 years, $64 million. And whenever you hear Orlando Brown Jr. announce he's multi-time Pro Bowler Orlando, 4-time Pro Bowler Orlando Brown, all 4 of those Pro Bowls came before Orlando Brown was playing with the Bengals. In the 3 seasons Orlando Brown has played with the Bengals, he has made to exactly 0 Pro Bowls. He's been mostly underwhelming. And he's going to be 30, and he's not getting any better. 2 seasons ago, he was terrible. He had a broken leg. Last year, he played all 17 games. So that's the thing that the Bengals are going to come back with. They're going to say, hey, he was durable last season. He played all 17 games. Yes, he gave up the record-breaking sack to Myles Garrett on Joe Burrow in the last game of the season. One-on-one, Myles Garrett walked right past him, tackled Joe Burrow for the record-breaking sack in the Bengals stadium, and then Zach Taylor got all butthurt about how they were celebrating on the Bengals' own field, and he didn't understand why the referees let them stop the game in the middle of the action. Like anybody gives a fuck about the Bengals trying to score a touchdown, which they did anyway, and the Bengals still lost that game. Not that I am still upset about that, but it just, sour grapes and a bad look by Zach Taylor in that moment. So, yeah, Orlando Brown, I'm sick of him. I'm sick of him not living up to his contract status, not even his potential, because he never had that much potential. I don't know. Maybe he was better when he was in Baltimore and Kansas City, but when you look at him, he looks like how he looked at the Combine, which is one of the worst Combine performances of all time. He was one of the weakest offensive tackles, one of the slowest, in terms of flat out 40 speed and lateral quickness. He's just a 6'8", 300 and something pound, mostly immovable objects. Although there were times last season where guys were able to push Orlando Brown straight back into the quarterback. So he's not immune to getting bull rushed at this stage of his career either. You can see he does not have the strength that you'd expect to someone of his size and stature to have. And much smaller human beings are able to just like hip toss him out of the way. So he's due to count against the Bengals cap $22 million. They would take a $7.8 million cap hit by releasing him. And that's the other thing the Bengals hate to do, is have dead money on the salary cap. But the salary cap is over $300 million this year. So having almost $8 million of dead cap money isn't that bad. Now, the question is, could the Bengals sign someone better? I think they could, but easy for me to say, right? Who specifically would I replace Orlando Brown Jr. with? The hypothetical tackles are easier said than done. So I don't know if the Bengals they probably wouldn't draft a tackle at 10th overall and have him come in and start as a rookie immediately. Amarius Mims, he was coming in at, was it 16th or 17th overall in the draft, maybe 17th. And he obviously was really raw in his rookie season. 10th overall, you can't necessarily guarantee the guy's going to be a day one starter. Maybe you get a Penei Sewell, but there have also been huge busts at that spot in the draft. And the Bengals are probably looking more defense in the first round anyway. So I think I've made my point there about Orlando Brown. But they could have freed up more money to go out and add new players. $14 million they could have saved by getting rid of Orlando Brown. I guess the problem is they don't have any young tackle depth you would really feel comfortable replacing him with. That would be the luxury if the Bengals had drafted somebody who was just waiting in the wings, ready to take over. But, Cody Ford can't replace Orlando Brown Jr. with just a worse version of him in Cody Ford. And I'm trying to think who else. Jalen Rivers was their kind of guard / tackle / center Swiss Army knife, but he wasn't really good at guard or tackle last season. They've had a few rotational guys who have not even been able to get on the field. So there's obviously nobody that the Bengals had their eye on, unfortunately. I think that's part of the problem, was Orlando Brown just doesn't have any competition, which is an issue. But there's really not a lot of competition for roster spots on this Bengals roster whatsoever. They're so top-heavy in the start. I mean, that's the way the NFL is structured. If you're, spending a lot of money on your backups, that's not what you want. You want to have, the best players playing the most. But you do want to have a little competition, I think, to push some of these guys. Because we saw, Geno Stone started for the Bengals every single game last season, seemingly without any competition from anybody for his starting spot. And yet, Geno Stone does not have a new team so far. Nobody has signed Geno Stone. The Bengals aren't going to re-sign Geno Stone. He might be out of the league by next year. I mean, maybe he'll get a league minimum contract, but nobody wants Geno Stone. So then why did the Bengals have him playing in every game? That doesn't make any sense, other than the fact that they were paying him a lot of money. He was getting paid a lot of money, so the Bengals put him out there on the field despite the fact that he was terrible. That's the only explanation I can come up with. And if that's the kind of business the Bengals are operating with, we'll just play the guys we're paying the most. They're going to continue to have terrible results. But maybe there's some positive. Let's try to be positive temporarily, briefly. There were a few positive things happening in the Bengals roster. Monday afternoon, a few stories started to come out about Bengals signing a new safety, Bryan Cook, originally from the Cincinnati area, played high school football at Mount Healthy, played a couple seasons at Howard, and then transferred to UC. He was a Bearcat in his final seasons of college and ended up going to the college football playoff. Got drafted in the second round by the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Bryan Cook, if we look at his career statistics, he's 6'1", 206, 26 right now. He's going to turn 27 in September. And he started the past 2 seasons, every regular season game in the Chiefs defense, 17 in 2024, 17 in 2025. 78 tackles total in 24, 85 total in 25. No sacks, no forced fumbles, no interceptions last season, and only 3 interceptions in his career. No forced fumbles in his career, and only 1 sack in 62 games played. So Bryan Cook does have, the shortcut a lot of fans like me who don't have a lot of time to go grind the tape and watch every single snap of Kansas City's defense, because safety is one of the hardest positions to evaluate for a professional scouting staff. And so, do I have a lot of confidence that the Bengals got this pick correct? Not necessarily, because they also picked Geno Stone in free agency and overpaid for him 2 years ago, and we saw how that turned out. So the same people are picking Bryan Cook. He seems like he should be better than Geno Stone. In terms of a tackling perspective, Bryan Cook, I think he only missed 4 or 5 tackles last season. Geno Stone led the NFL with over 25 missed tackles last season alone. So even if you added up like all of Bryan Cook's missed tackles in his entire career, it might not be as many as Geno Stone and Jordan Battle had combined last season, because those were 2 of the highest missed tackle statistics, Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, in the entire NFL, and not including Bengals linebackers and Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter. Oren Burks was creeping up on the list there. A lot of guys are missing tackles for the Bengals. So the Bengals needed to solidify their tackling, and Bryan Cook should be a better tackler. I was going to say the shortcut a lot of people take is go to the PFF grades, but that doesn't tell the whole story, obviously. But Bryan Cook was one of the higher rated safety. I think he was number 4 rated safety overall, had a good run and pass defense grade. So he should come in and be a solid player. It's hard to say how different players are going to play in different defenses, but on paper, this is a huge upgrade over Geno Stone. I can't necessarily say the Bengals got a huge upgrade at the edge defense position, but Trey Hendrickson is not expected to sign with the Bengals. And then today we found out Trey Hendrickson is going to sign with the Baltimore Ravens. More on that later. But Trey Hendrickson's leaving. Joseph Ossai was announced to be signing with the New York Jets on a multi-year contract. Something the Bengals don't want to do is guarantee multiple years of a contract. So that's always the biggest deciding factor for a lot of players. And the Bengals don't guarantee money outside of the first year of the contract. They'll give big signing bonuses, but then after that, no guaranteed money, which a lot of players don't really prefer to do. So the Bengals have to overpay up front, and that was their other big signing. They signed Boye Mafe, defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks, Super Bowl championship winners. Now, Boye Mafe, he was ranked pretty highly, actually, in the Greg Rosenthal NFL top 101 free agents. Boye Mafe was number 11. And going back to his drafting days, he had a high RAS score for whatever that's worth. He is a little bit undersized at 6'3", 261 pounds, but he has elite explosion and speed in terms of 38-inch verticals, over 10-foot broad jump, 4.53 in the 40-yard dash is extremely fast for a defensive end. That's faster than some of the wide receivers we saw. I think Carnell Tate ran something like that, or a little bit slower. He's a wide receiver out of Ohio State who is initially projected to go in the first round, but I think that's about as fast as Taj Brooks, the running back the Bengals drafted last year in the draft in the 6th round. I think that's about as fast as he is running. So, pretty explosive athlete in Boye Mafe, but he only had 2 sacks last season. He's coming down off of a career high 2 seasons ago where he had 9 sacks. But he's more of a rotational guy the last few seasons with the Seahawks. Now, the amount of money the Bengals are reportedly going to end up paying him is supposedly a 3-year, $60 million deal. That amount of money is much more in line with starting like almost every down type of player. And Boye Mafe was number 11 on the top 101. Bryan Cook was not too far behind him. He was like he was like 29th. Yeah. Ranked number 29 out of the top 101. So in the top 30 for both of these guys, just in terms of what some journalist thinks about them. But right now, as I'm speaking on Wednesday afternoon, there's only 2 players remaining who were in the top 30 that are still available. Number 4 would be Kyler Murray. Number 19 was Rasheed Walker. But otherwise, all the way down to the top 40. After those 2, then you get to number 42. Jawan Jennings is the next available player. So all the top 40 players basically have been taken already, and the Bengals got 2 of them. Now, both of these players are supposed to be 3-year contracts. Boye Mafe, $60 million, Bryan Cook, $40 million, and that's probably up to, we don't know. Bryan Cook says it's going to pay $18 million in year 1. We'll get more details. It doesn't really matter. But around $100 million, we don't know, the terms of the deal necessarily, but Bengals are going to be able to say, hey, we spent money on these guys, and you can't argue with that. Okay, fine. But they signed Dalton Risner to a 1-year deal also that was like $3.5 million guaranteed, and then up to $5.5 million with some incentives. They also re-signed cornerback Jalen Davis to a minimal contract. I'm sure he's barely been on the roster the last few seasons, so he's not going to cost that much. But other than that, I think Ben Baby had a free agency tracker for the Bengals. Yeah, let me pull up the Bengals free agency tracker. Oh, he didn't list the people who left. I guess I'll have to go to maybe Cincy Jungle had that. But there have been a few Bengals who left. I mentioned Joseph Ossai already. Okay. They also, while I'm on the topic of re-signing players, they re-signed Tanner Hudson, Kendrick Pryor, Kendall Milton. Kendrick Pryor, I don't even know he was on the active roster last season for most of the games. Kendall Milton played sparingly, didn't really have much of an impact. Tanner Hudson had that nice one-handed catch on Thanksgiving and made a few plays, didn't fumble like Noah Fant, who has since left and signed with the New Orleans Saints. Offensive guard Cordell Volson has signed with the Tennessee Titans after he had to sit out of all of last season with a shoulder injury. I think he had a torn rotator cuff that required surgery or something like that. So Cordell Volson, happy trails. Still unsigned at this moment. I haven't checked, but I haven't seen any new news. Tyson Anderson, Brian Asamoah, Joe Flacco, Lucas Patrick, Cam Sample, Geno Stone, Cam Taylor-Britt, Marco Wilson, and Jake Browning, who Jake Browning did not receive any kind of free agent tender that Bengals would basically want to claim any rights to Jake Browning. And I don't blame them after the performance we saw last season. Better to let Jake Browning test the open market, I would say. But then we have this Trey Hendrickson and Max Crosby Raiders-Ravens fiasco. And I feel sympathy for the reporters who have to report on this trade between the Raiders and the Ravens, because the two names of the teams are so similar and you're going back and forth about discussing them. I'm sure people are getting this confused and misspeaking when they're, talking about these different teams. I'll try to get this correct, but they're two distinctly different franchises, obviously. Las Vegas, Mark Davis, total incompetence. Baltimore, owner got an A+. Speaking of which, I should go back and check. What did the Las Vegas Raiders get in terms of report card grades? Team ownership for the Raiders, A. So not bad. They got an overall rank of 6. But so you can see there's a disconnect between the results on the field and the results of the player report card. So the Raiders were the last team in the NFL. They're drafting number 1 overall. They had the worst record, but they're number 6 in terms of how the players felt about the organization. They gave an F to the offensive coordinator. I forget who that was. I'd have to look. That's like the huge outlier here, the thing that stands out the most. But everything else was like an A, A-, A+ for treatment of families, home game field, food and nutrition, A, nutrition, A, locker room, A, training staff, A. The only thing that didn't get an A was the coaching staff, basically. Position coaches, C+, offensive coordinator, F, defensive coordinator, C, special teams coach, C-, travel, B, head coach, C+. So Pete Carroll, who was the offensive coordinator for the Raiders last season? Oh, Chip Kelly. I forgot. Yeah. Chip Kelly was coming in. I think this is his first season back in the NFL after being at Ohio State. And he made a lot of headlines because he was telling Ashton Jeanty to change up his stance. Ashton Jeanty would stand straight up before the snap and then kind of get into a more athletic stance, and Chip Kelly was telling him to bend over. But Ashton Jeanty is only 5'7", so if he's getting bent over, he really can't see anything over the line. So there's a reason why he was standing straight up. But anyway, Chip Kelly, F, he got fired before the season was even over. So it's one of those things where your team's not playing well. Maybe a lot of blame was going on to Chip Kelly, but whatever. Vegas Raiders actually have a better overall ranking than the Baltimore Ravens. That's neither here nor there, but something to keep in mind because Max Crosby reportedly was sick of the Raiders and wanted out and all this kind of stuff. But, they're one of the higher ranking teams in the NFL, so it could be a lot worse for Max Crosby. He could be going to the Steelers or the Browns or the Bengals, who are in the bottom 5 of the NFL rankings. But the Raiders and the Ravens announced that Max Crosby was going to be traded for 2 first-round picks, this year and next year's first-round picks for the Ravens, to Las Vegas for Max Crosby. Now, Max Crosby sat out against his will the final 2 games of last season because he had a knee injury, which he had to have surgery on. But he was saying that he could play through it. And Neil Elatrash, the doctor who performed Joe Burrow's ACL surgery and numerous other professional athletes' surgeries, I think he operated on Kobe Bryant, and he's operated on, who knows, Tiger Woods, I don't know, all kinds of famous professional athletes and celebrities. And you kind of get these celebrity doctors who perform these surgeries. I'm not sure how necessary it is versus random, not necessarily Joe Blow surgeon, but any other experienced surgeon you could find in a relatively populated area. But supposedly Max Crosby had a successful surgery in the offseason, and so these trades are never final until the team, it's always pending a physical. And it's never official until they actually do the physical and get it signed, pen and paper, all that stuff. So it came out last night, the night before free agency officially opens, Tuesday night. Psych, deals off. Max Crosby will not be going to the Baltimore Ravens. They didn't give a lot of specifics, but the assumption was because of a failed physical. They didn't say what specifically was wrong with the physical. But the Raiders just released a statement on social media saying, the Ravens backed out of our agreement. We will have no further comment at this time. So they didn't really say why, but they obviously put the deal being off and the decision accounted to the Ravens. And that's their prerogative. I mean, that's, as I just said, it's not final until the physical and they actually sign the agreement. And up until then, you can back out of it. Same thing with, buying a house or buying a car or getting married. I mean, you can get engaged, you can agree in principle, you can have an oral agreement, but unless you get it signed on the dotted line, everybody can make their own decisions and change their mind. So that's what the Ravens decided to do. And we don't know, maybe they had a very good reason for doing it. So people are having all these paranoid, delusional conspiracy theories about, the Ravens decided that they wanted to go a different direction at the last second, and then they wanted to screw the Raiders because the Raiders signed Tyler Linderbaum, the Ravens center, for a huge record-breaking contract, more than the Ravens were willing to pay. I mean, those two things are not necessarily directly correlated. The Raiders did go on a big spending spree as if they were not going to have Max Crosby's big contract on their books for this season, but it's not the end of the world. If they still have Max Crosby on the team, they can either find some way to trade him, although obviously it won't be as good of a price that they were going to get from the Ravens. The Ravens were willing to give up 2 first-round picks. Now that other teams have seen that the Ravens backed out and don't want to give up that much, obviously no other team is going to be willing to give up that much. We don't know what other teams were offering. So reportedly, the Cowboys were trying to get Max for a first and a second and a player, and maybe another team was offering a first and some other draft pick or a first-round draft pick and a player. We don't know. But now everybody's going to kind of back off. The market's going to cool off for Max Crosby. And so in that void, Trey Hendrickson's market all of a sudden heated up. People were saying, there's no market for Trey Hendrickson. He's not getting the offers that he's looking for. All of a sudden, Ravens sign Trey Hendrickson, 4 years, $112 million. And not quite on the par of $35 or $40 million that maybe Trey Hendrickson was seeking, but still a lot better than what he was going to get with the Bengals. It's $60 million fully guaranteed, a max value of $120 over 4 years. So max value of $30 million, $60 million fully guaranteed. And obviously the Bengals were not going to go anywhere near $60 million fully guaranteed for a player like Trey Hendrickson, who's coming off only 7 games because he had to have surgery, and he's getting up there in age. He's 30 years old. He's not necessarily a great run defender. He's more of a passing down specialist, and you could almost say that Trey Hendrickson sometimes take plays off if he knows that it's going to be a running play. But the Ravens, this puts them in kind of a tricky position. They lost Tyler Linderbaum, but now they have 2 first-round picks that they were planning to trade away. They don't have they don't have Max Crosby. They get Trey Hendrickson on a lower price than they would have had to pay Max Crosby anyway, because Max Crosby's, I don't know, like per year how it would break down, but like the overall, average annual value of these contracts, Max Crosby still is at a higher price than Trey Hendrickson. He's still, if you take the 4-year, $112 million, which is the number that the agent wants us to hear about. So it's never quite that great, but these are the numbers that are reported on NFL.com. So take everything with a grain of salt. But, that's about, like $28 million a year, 27, 28, somewhere in there. Not top of the market for edge rusher, but pretty good deal for Trey Hendrickson. And playing with a franchise like the Baltimore Ravens on grass, I don't know if Trey Hendrickson had any kind of hard feelings with the way the negotiations have gone with the Bengals organization over the past several seasons when he's tried to get a deal done and the Bengals have threatened to franchise tag him or just gave him like a 1-year stopgap extension. But it's going to be not ideal. Having either one of these guys as a AFC North opponent is not ideal. We've already got Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, all these defensive specialists. Roquan Smith is, linebacker for the Ravens, but then you add a pass rusher like Trey Hendrickson to the mix, who is already very familiar with the Bengals, with Joe Burrow and Orlando Brown Jr., since he's been practicing with them every day, basically, for the last 4 seasons. It's going to be, he's going to know us, we're going to know him. So it's hard to say who has the advantage, but in the matchup, I would kind of favor Trey Hendrickson because the Bengals are a passing team. Trey Hendrickson is a passing specialist, whereas Max Crosby is a little bit more of a defensive run-stopping specialist. He's got a ton of tackles for loss, but a lot of them come in the running game where he's coming from the backside, diagnosing running plays and stopping the play in the backfield. Trey Hendrickson does that occasionally, but that's not his bread and butter. Not as nearly as much as Max Crosby. On the other hand, Trey Hendrickson is known for getting opportune sacks. Max Crosby, not necessarily a sack artist. He does get his fair share of them, but he's more of a disruptor on every play. And I'll have to go back and look at total snaps played, but Max Crosby kind of prided himself on never coming off the field, being an every down kind of guy, whereas we did see Trey Hendrickson on the sidelines quite a bit, catching his breath, maybe if it was going to be a running play or, the team. It was kind of one of those situations where it's going to be, middle of the game, like second quarter, Trey Hendrickson might take a drive off here and there. Max Crosby never took any drives off. So hard to say as a Bengals fan which one I would rather see less as an opponent, but having Trey Hendrickson in the division is not good. It's not good for anybody in the division, the Browns and the Steelers included, but it's not going to be an easy matchup for the Bengals, especially, like I mentioned, if I had to pick Trey Hendrickson against Orlando Brown Jr., I would go Trey Hendrickson almost every time. That seems like a terrible matchup for the Bengals. One where they would have to put double teams on Trey Hendrickson basically every play with, a Drew Sample, who's probably still going to be on the roster again next season, and Chase Brown chipping out of the backfield on Trey Hendrickson, something like that. But we're going to have to see him 2 times a season. Not good news. I'm trying to think. In the division, the Browns, what did they do? Browns made a few moves, mostly on the offensive line. Browns acquired Titus Howard in a trade from the Texans and signed him to a 3-year, $63 million extension. Tevin Jenkins re-signed with the team. He was a first or second round draft pick by the Chicago Bears a few years ago. Zion Johnson signed a 3-year, $50 million deal at guard with the Browns. Elton Jenkins expected to sign a 2-year, $24 million with $20 million guarantee. And the on the tight end, which is kind of like a 6th offensive lineman at this point, they signed Jack Stoll. I think he was with the Colts last season, maybe? Maybe not. I don't know if he has any experience. Let me look at his statistics on the NFL's. Okay, never mind. Jack Stoll was with the Saints last season. He's played for the Eagles and the Dolphins, not the Colts at all. But anyway, Jack Stoll signed with the Browns. And the Browns also signed Quincy Williams, linebacker for the Jets, brother of Quinnen Williams. 2 years, $13 million, 9 guaranteed. Very athletic. He had a good game against the Bengals last season when the Jets came into Paycor Stadium and beat the Bengals, one of the Jets' only 3 wins of the entire last season. Quincy Williams, we'll get to see him 2 more times a year, which is not good for Chase Brown or anybody. Steelers are still up in the air at quarterback. They have not signed anybody to quarterback as far as I know. They don't know if Aaron Rodgers is coming back. It's a weird... Aaron Rodgers... It's so diametrically opposed. Aaron Rodgers talked about how he doesn't want to be in the public spotlight, doesn't want attention. He's not going to be on TV after he retires. But then he goes on TV into the public spotlight to talk about how he doesn't know whether or not he wants to play next season. And he's talking about how he doesn't want to be in the spotlight while thrusting himself into the spotlight. Can't have it both ways, Aaron Rodgers. But meanwhile, the Steelers have decided to trade for Michael Pittman Jr., get a second legitimate wide receiver to pair with DK Metcalf. So they're really investing heavily in the wide receiver position. Not totally dissimilar from the way that the Bengals invested in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. But Bengals obviously drafted both of those guys, where the Steelers are acquiring their wide receivers via trade. That was one of the things that the Steelers were known for, was getting wide receivers to pan out through the draft. Juju Smith-Schuster, Antonio Brown. I could go back. I don't know if you want to include like Plexico Burress, but Santonio Holmes wasn't drafted by the Steelers, but Hines Ward, I guess you could say. Did he get drafted by the Steelers? I don't know. A bunch of Steelers receivers. I mean, you could cherry pick results for a lot of teams and say, oh, they drafted a good player at this position. But Steelers re-signed Cam Hayward to a 2-year, $32 million extension, $16 million guaranteed. Cole Holcomb re-signed 2-year, $5 million. He's a pretty good linebacker, I thought. Jamal Dean, 3 years, $36 million, cornerback. Asante Samuel Jr. coming back on a 1-year, $4 million deal. Darnell Savage at safety. And Rico Dowdle I think he was last playing with the Carolina Panthers last season. He signed a 2-year, $12 million contract with the Steelers to give them a little bit more running juice. As far as the Ravens go, they re-signed quarterback Tyler Huntley to be their backup. John Simpson, I swear John Simpson was on the Bengals at one point. Not that the NFL's website is going to tell me very well. NFL has like the worst website. It's amazing. No, John Simpson played for the Raiders, the Ravens, then the Jets. Apparently not the Bengals. He's signing with the Baltimore Ravens on a 3-year, $30 million deal. And Chidobe Awuzie, former Bengal, is re-signing on a fully guaranteed 1-year, $5 million contract. So even though Cheeto gave up one of the touchdowns last season in Pittsburgh that I think, or was it in Baltimore? I can't remember. But Cheeto slipped and fell and gave up a touchdown that ended up basically losing them the game against the Steelers, I think. But he's coming back to the Ravens because he played okay. So we haven't seen a ton of huge moves. Like we saw, quarterbacks getting traded, the Kirk Cousins type deals we saw a couple years ago. We haven't seen any moves like that. We saw Kenneth Walker, Super Bowl MVP, signing with the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-year, up to $45 million deal. Super Bowl MVP, you're going to overpay a little bit for him, but there weren't a ton of huge contracts I'm trying to think of as I say that. Some of the teams that made the biggest deals, probably the biggest splash was Tyler Linderbaum going to the Raiders in free agency, only because previously the highest paid center was making about $18 million a year in Creed Humphrey in Kansas City. Tyler Linderbaum is going to be making new money average of $27 million. So from 18 to 27, 50% increase in the center market. And the Ravens obviously were not willing to pay that much for Tyler Linderbaum because they could have had him on a 5th-year contract extension, but they decided not to pick up his 5th-year contract extension because he had made it to the Pro Bowl. It would have been over $20 million a year. So they didn't want to do that. So he played his 4th year. They decided not to franchise tag him either because that would have been the offensive lineman franchise tag as a collective, not strictly the center position. So when you get to franchise tagging offensive linemen, they're over $25 million also. So the Ravens decided, well, we don't want to pay that much. Well, they were probably offering low 20s, like 21, 22, $23 million a year, thinking, hey, the previous high watermark was 18. We're besting that by, 15, 20%. You should be happy with that. Raiders came in and said, not so fast. We're going to offer 50% increase over the top market center. And Ravens apparently weren't willing to match that. And it's going to be one of those things is he an outlier? Does he totally reset the market for centers? And it's like everything. It's supply and demand. We had seen a number of veteran centers retire this season. I want to say the center for the Chicago Bears just retired, and I think the center for the Detroit Lions retired this offseason. So you've got a situation where it's not necessarily the most traditionally in-demand position, but this season, the stars have lined up a little bit for Tyler Linderbaum. What else? The New York Jets have been surprisingly active in free agency. Geno Smith got traded back to his original team, the New York Jets. Of course, we remember back in 2013, Geno Smith, I think it was a 2nd-round pick of the Jets. And as Jets podcaster Michael Nania said if you had told him back in 2013 that Geno Smith was the penciled-in day one starter for the New York Jets in 2026, he probably would have been ecstatic, not knowing the circumstances that had preceded all that. But Geno, interesting to see how Geno Smith is received in his second time in New York. Breece Hall was franchise tagged. He's going to get $14 million for 2026 as they continue to work on a long-term contract. So they're not letting Breece Hall get out the door just yet. They signed Jelani Woods, Dylan Parham, Kingsley Enagbare. I mentioned Joseph Ossai from the Bengals, signing with the Jets for 3 years, $36 million. He'd been looking for, just like Trey Hendrickson, he's been looking for that long-term extension, and he's got his, just like Trey Hendrickson got his. Obviously, Joseph Ossai, not nearly as much money as Trey Hendrickson, but still more money than Joseph Ossai has made in his career up until now. David Onyemata, defensive line, signed a 1-year, $10 million deal with the Jets. They also traded for T'Vondre Sweat, who is like a almost 400-pound nose tackle. They gave up edge rusher Jermaine Johnson II in a trade. So totally different players, but we can see the Jets are signing edge rushers, getting rid of Jermaine Johnson, who was a first-round pick, and trading for T'Vondre Sweat, who's that big nose tackle that they kind of lost when they traded away Quinnen Williams somewhat to the Cowboys last season. Not the same player, but the Jets also signed former draft pick of their own, Demario Davis, who has been in the league for a long time now. He signed a 2-year, $22 million deal with $15 million guaranteed. I think Demario Davis is 37 years old, so he's been in the league for like 16 seasons by now. Incredibly long career and still going. Nashawn Wright signed with the Jets, 1 year, $5.5 million deal at cornerback. Safety Dane Belton, 1 year, $4 million. And the Jets made another trade with the Miami Dolphins for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Minkah played, he played for the Dolphins, for the Steelers. I can't remember if he played for any other teams, but Minkah, I don't think he's 30 years old yet, so he's been in the league for a while, but maybe 29. Still one of the top safeties in the league, but he's going to the Jets. I don't know if the Bengals have to play the Jets, but Jets are loading up. Raiders are loading up. Obviously, all the teams that were at the bottom of the league, except for the Browns haven't made a ton of moves, even though they were at the bottom of the league, because they've got that Deshaun Watson contract still hanging over their head. They haven't made a move at quarterback. But speaking of quarterbacks, we saw Tua Tagovailoa get released by the Dolphins. He's going to go to the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons released quarterback Kirk Cousins. I don't think he has a new home just yet, but his agent is very savvy, so undoubtedly Kirk Cousins is going to get like $60 million a year somehow, wherever he signs. We also saw Kyler Murray get released officially by the Cardinals. He is not expected, but rumors are suggesting that Kyler Murray may sign with the Minnesota Vikings, but that has not happened as of yet. But we did see Bengals backup quarterback Jake Browning. He signed today, or is expected to sign, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a 1-year contract. So I have to refresh this site here because I don't know if it has it updated yet. I don't see it on NFL.com yet, but it was reported Jake Browning was going to be going to the Buccaneers. So he's not going to be with the Bengals. Bengals, that leaves them with Joe Flacco as the only backup quarterback on the roster from last season still available. But Joe Flacco has made it clear that he was looking for a starting opportunity, something that he definitely was not going to get if Joe Burrow was healthy and starting for the Bengals. It's obviously Joe Burrow's job. So Joe Flacco is going to be looking for any team other than the Bengals to sign him to a starting type opportunity. before he decides to come back. And even then, he may decide that he wants to be a backup in a different city other than Cincinnati. He's going to say all the right things about, oh, I like being in Cincinnati and it's a great opportunity. And obviously he loves throwing to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but maybe more to it than that. We don't know. So if the Bengals lose Joe Flacco and Jake Browning, they'll have to get an entirely new backup quarterback personnel, which obviously the Bengals haven't put any real investment into. I mean, they signed Jake Browning to the absolute minimum when they saw he could play like at serviceable, okay, adequate type levels. But they haven't drafted a quarterback since they've drafted Joe Burrow. They haven't given him any, not really competition, but anyone to push him. Like we saw when the New England Patriots were at their height, winning all those Super Bowls, they drafted guys like Jimmy Garoppolo. Did they draft Ryan Mallett out of Arkansas? They drafted Matt Castle. Not only so that if and when Tom Brady got injured, they had a viable backup to come in and replace him, but also to give him that, kind of incentive or kind of something to just push the starting quarterback so he doesn't get too complacent. I mean, Joe Burrow is more than comfortable in Cincinnati. He knows he's got pretty much the run of the city. If the Bengals ever did anything to cross Joe Burrow publicly, the fans would obviously revolt. So the Bengals and Joe Burrow want to stay on the same page. But it would be wise of the Bengals to at least have a little bit better insurance policy and don't just have random backup guy coming in. They got lucky. And Duke Tobin wants to take so much credit for going out and signing Joe Flacco in the middle of the season, trading for Joe Flacco in the middle of the season, acting like that was the thing that turned everything around. They won one game with Joe Flacco. They still got eliminated from the playoffs. It didn't really make any difference. And the reason that they had to trade for Joe Flacco in the first place was because of Duke Tobin's incompetence by not having a better option on the roster than Jake Browning to begin with. So we will have to see what moves, if any, the Bengals make during the rest of free agency. This is only day one. I don't want to get ahead of myself and say they haven't done enough. But so far, they haven't done enough to convince me that they have gotten significantly better. That's the whole point of this exercise, is to make the team better than it was last year. Evaluate, self-scout thyself, and see what areas you can improve on. And like I said, unfortunately from the Bengals, lately I've been hearing too much of everything's good, we don't need to improve on anything, nothing needs to change, we're going to keep the status quo and get right back to where we were, 5 seasons ago at this point. I am not putting a lot of faith. I'm not going to hold my breath, let's say. So maybe the Bengals will surprise me in the coming few days and sign some big name free agent or make a trade, but I would doubt it just because the Bengals they don't have any compensatory draft picks. They have 7 total draft picks, but they had to trade their 5th round draft pick in exchange for a 6th. They don't have a 5th this year. I think they have 2 6ths and a 7th. That was the deal for Joe Flacco. Had to give up that 5th rounder. So they don't have a ton of draft capital is what I'm getting at. They don't have a ton of draft capital to go out and trade up or trade away draft picks in exchange for a player. That wouldn't really make sense because the Bengals, they love those rookie contracts. They want to keep all those lottery tickets in their draft picks. It's a tough situation, tough sitch for the Bengals in terms of how are they going to get better for 2026. As it stands right now, they're putting a lot of eggs into this coming draft and also betting on last couple seasons drafts paying off in terms of players that they drafted playing better after getting a little bit of experience in the NFL. You can't have guys coming in necessarily year one playing at the top of their game. It's going to take them a few seasons to get the hang of things, get experience, become veterans. But the Bengals haven't always been great at drafting and developing and retaining guys. Or just retaining guys in general. Like we've seen them just let guys walk out the door with no compensation whatsoever, like a Joseph Ossai, like a Trey Hendrickson. They could have traded those guys multiple times and get something in return, but decided to just kind of let them sit on the roster and not do anything. But like I said, this is middle of March. It's way too early to start making any kind of proclamations or judgments about how the Bengals are handling their business. It all really comes down to 6 months from now when they actually start playing games. It's going to be a long time until then. So there's plenty of time leading up to the draft. And then you're going to have off-season training camp and all that kind of stuff. Lots of things can happen in the meantime. But for right now, it looks like a pretty status quo free agency for the Bengals, which I shouldn't be surprised by. They got a 90-year-old owner who calls all the shots. So this is a very elderly, old man type of offseason. Nothing surprising, nothing fancy. Very plain, unexciting offseason. Just the way the Bengals like it. So I don't know when the next episode is going to be. I'll try to be consistent. If anything happens, hopefully they sign some free agents I can come back and talk about, or maybe something interesting happens in the draft. I don't know, but whenever that time comes, maybe draft time, we'll be back with another episode of this podcast. But until then, don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know what you think about free agency so far. Did the Bengals make the right decision in letting Joseph Ossai and Trey Hendrickson go and getting Boye Mafe and maybe a player to be named later in the draft as defensive edge replacements? What positions are the most critical areas of need right now for the Bengals? But until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.